We challenged you to our spiciest competition yet. Can you piece together a bizarre build out of context for the brand newly revealed Skillet item for Jules? And as per usual, we gave you just 3 days to figure it out. No hero powers, no hero skills, no hero stats, none of that. No scaling, nothing. Just raw bizarre power. Then we scrutinized over the entire thing with the aid of Twitch chat for hours on end to see where there were holes and weaknesses in the build, but you were probably fine, right? You guys are the biggest bizarre nerds out there. Remember, if you want to take part in these bizarre challenges to prepare for the launch of the game, then you'll want to join our Discord server. Links are down below. We launch the challenges every Tuesday and we review them every Friday. So without further ado, on with the challenge. This one is called Double Trouble. I assume, because we're doing things multiple times, I can already see an item that I like a lot, that I know has something to do with double, that I'm talking about in an upcoming video, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, let's quickly briefly go over the build, I guess, and then we'll go through each individual item and see what it's doing. We have the Skillet, which is what we're building around, but we also have on top of that, left to right, curry, egg timer, spicy pepper, hot potato, slushy, toaster, and skewer. So starting with Skillet, which is going to be our core item, the sort of challenge that it was to build around. For Skillet, every 8 seconds, this medium appliance gives its passive +1 burn for the fight. Interesting mechanic there. And then its passive is when you use an adjacent ingredient or meal item, apply to burn. So Skillet's all about applying burn. The faster it triggers, the faster it can buff itself and apply bigger amounts of burn, or the faster things next to it just means it's applying burn more regularly. Immediately, that's what my brain is telling me. It's saying there are 2 different ways this can get more value. Either it goes faster and therefore applies more burn, or the things either side of it go fast and it just applies burn more regularly. And you don't necessarily have to do one or the other. You can definitely do both. And I guess we'll dig through the rest of this build and see what you went for, if you went for either or both. So the first item you've got on the list is curry. This is your leftmost item. Curry is a small meal, and every 11 seconds it applies 10 joy and 4 burn. It charges 50% faster while the enemy is burning. Important distinction to make, charging 50% faster isn't it happens twice as often. 50% charge speed, if you're at base, if you have no speed, no other items, if you're charging 50% faster, that's basically like gaining 50 speed. So it effectively, at base, works out to be a quarter, I'm pretty sure, yeah. Damn, this is difficult to talk about. We have full like videos and guides going over stats, so check out the speed one for that. So yeah, this curry is going to want burning happening all the time. I did the maths, I think, and with burning being applied, this becomes an 8.25 second cooldown by default. That's pretty good for 10 joy and 4 burn. 4 burn works out to be 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 10 damage. So every 8.25 seconds, you do 20 damage effectively with curry, which is it's pretty solid, but especially from a small meal with just 4 gold. So yeah, really, really solid item. I think curry is going to be able to fit into a lot of builds, with it having both joy and burn on it. And I think that's going to be a really big thing as you try to get these builds. Obviously, this is bizarre builds out of context. We're not considering if you have any more speed. We're not considering what other items you're going to have or be able to go to or have to go to. However, if I'm considering how we get to this build, picking up a curry early on is pretty safe as Jules, because you'll either use the joy or the burn, or potentially neither and sell it for some knives or something. But the point is it can fit into a lot of builds, doesn't take up much space, and isn't very expensive. So a really, really good early pickup, and fits nicely into this build already, because we know we're trying to add burn. And the more burn you add, the more damage your burn's going to be. I guess at this point it's important to go over quickly how burn works. Burn stacks, it's a condition. Every time you apply burn, it adds the number of burn to the amount of burn you've already applied. So say that I've applied 2 burn to the enemy, and now I'm using curry and it's adding 4 burn, they will get 6 burn. Burn stacks tick down once every half second. So it'll go from 6 to 5 to 4 within a second. every time it ticks down, it does that much damage. So if you can stack it up to 30 burn, it's going to do 30 damage in that half a second tick. Whereas if you've just got 6 burn, it's going to do 6 damage in that half a second tick. So the bigger the number, it's definitely the better with burn. Egg Timer is next up in the list. It is a small item with no archetypes, and every 7 seconds it will advance adjacent small items by 1 second. This is exactly what we want next to a curry. So curry effectively becomes a 10-second item. That's just off by default, and it's already charging faster. 4 times 8, 32. You'll be safe for 32 triggers of curry before it misses the use of Egg Timer, if the enemy is burning. So actually has really, really good synergy. I like that. Obviously, we can't talk about Egg Timer too much without talking about the other item it's buffing, which is the Spicy Pepper, a small ingredient that every 9 seconds applies 6 burn and 2 daze. So we have a small item next to Egg Timer. Excellent. It's going to be getting that cooldown reduction. It's going to be running at about 8 seconds every time it charges. There'll be a couple of times where it sort of skips out because the cooldown of Spicy Pepper is too long and Egg Timer is much shorter. However, we're now looking at Spicy Pepper. 6 burn and 2 daze. 5 gold means you can pick it up pretty early on. And this is a small ingredient with a decent amount of burn on it. Daze can also be useful. It slows the charge speed of your enemy's items, so it can interrupt what they're doing. And it's like the perfect sort of catalyst for a build like this, right? And yeah, that's kind of Spicy Pepper. It's such a simple yet perfect item in this build. It's required, but its job isn't difficult. So it can be replaced by other things. As we'll see in other videos on the channel, there are lots of Jules items that can apply burning. But Spicy Pepper is a particular favourite. Alright, on to the core of this build. We briefly spoke about it, but the Skillet, medium appliance every 8 seconds. It adds +1 burning to its passive, and then when you use adjacent ingredient or meal items, apply the passive, which starts out at 2. So we know the Spicy Pepper to the one side of it is going to trigger every 8 seconds. Unfortunately, because of how left to right works, Skillet won't activate before Spicy Pepper. So what you're going to have is Spicy Pepper activate, triggering Skillet's passive, and then Skillet will upgrade its passive. That's not ideal, but that was going to happen one way or another. You can't have items to the right of Skillet so that so that Skillet activates first. That's just a little bit unfortunate. I'm trying to think of a way you could avoid that, but honestly, nothing's coming to mind. You'd need to somehow apply Advance to Skillet, which is a medium item. There's not a lot of cards in Jules' arsenal to do that. So unfortunately, Skillet isn't going to benefit instantly or perfectly from Spicy Pepper, but it is naturally going to help it, right? This basically buffs Spicy Pepper's burn damage, right? When Spicy Pepper activates, it now deals 8 burn total the first time, then 9 burn the second time, and so on and so forth. So your build has got some scaling in the middle of a fight, which is brilliant to have. Skillet, really, really good for the size, good for the cost as well. 5 gold, that's not going to cost you anything. You can pick that up nice and early, and it'll add 2 burn to items either side, like Spicy Pepper. And also, I guess, Hot Potato, which is the item to the right of Skillet in this build. So, Hot Potato, every 8 seconds, this small meal applies 8 burn and 1 joy, and this then gets -1 burn and +1 joy. Thematically, adore this. This is basically like playing Hot Potato, right? If you've got a steaming Hot Potato, it's not going to be very joyful to eat because it's going to burn the hell out of your mouth, and it's going to be super hot as it does burn damage, and as the name suggests. But as you start tossing it around, it'll get cooler, and once it's cooler, it becomes more joyful to eat. So yeah, a really interesting item. I assume, and for the purposes of this is what we'll go with, that once Hot Potato is triggered 8 times, it doesn't go into negative burn. It doesn't start cleansing the enemy of burn. It just gets to 0. At which point, the fact that it still scales in joy can be very handy. Now, of course, this isn't going to be triggering an awful lot. We have nothing around this that makes it trigger faster. And this is a burn build, so we don't typically need that joy, although it definitely helps. Like if we already look, we're applying 10 joy with curry. We're now applying up to, I don't know, maybe 5 joy with Hot Potato. A 40-second game, that sounds about right if it's going quite long. So that's already about, 15-ish joy. That's a lot on top of the burn damage we're having. So, Hot Potato kind of does its job. Every 8 seconds, Skillet... Skillet, because Hot Potato is to the right of Skillet, it's going to work the other way around, right? So at the 8-second mark, well, the 7-second mark, Egg Timer makes Spicy Pepper an 8-second cooldown item. So at the 8-second mark, Spicy Pepper triggers 6 burn and 2 days, which then triggers Skillet's passive to deal 2 more burn. So Spicy Pepper basically does 8 burn and 2 days. Skillet will then activate because it's to the next item along from left to right. And that's how speed ties are broken, by the way. If 2 items have the exact same cooldown, they activate left to right. So Skillet's the next item that activates, adding 1 burn to its passive, and then Hot Potato activates, still at the exact same second, applying 8 burn plus the 3 from Skillet, so 11 burn and 1 joy, and then its inherent burn at 8 goes down by 1. And that's actually an interesting point as well, because Hot Potato's next to Skillet. If by some absurd means you get into like, what, a 1 minute long game, and Hot Potato has gone all the way down to 0 burn, it's still going to apply burn through Skillet. And it'll actually be a considerable amount of burn at that point. I think it'll be 10 burn by that point. Alright, moving on, we have the Slushy, which is a small meal that every 10 seconds applies 20 joy. And then also 2 seconds of freeze to 2 enemy items. That's an interesting item to add. I guess 20 joy is like nothing to shake a stick at. That's a considerable amount of damage, seeing as most builds start at 100 health and not many of them scale in health. For example, this build, no health scaling. So this build is going to have 100 health. So if you go against a mirror, 20 joy at the 10-second mark, that's like maths, a fifth of the enemy's health bar. As well, you've already been starting to burn them, right? And then you also freeze 2 enemy items for 2 seconds, which just means they flat out stop. So if they have a similar build, like with Egg Timer, for example, speeding stuff up, you freeze that Egg Timer, completely messes with their strategy. Everything's going to be off at awkward different timings, or say you froze the Skillet, so the Skillet was really far behind the other 2 items. Freeze can be really, really disorientating. It's, at least we hope, Permafreeze isn't really going to be a build. I assume I will try to do it, just because I think it's hilarious. But actually find those out, like, out of context, yeah, you can come up with freeze builds. In the actual game, freeze builds are going to be much harder to come across, at least so we think. However, just a little bit of freeze, it should be enough to disrupt the enemy and to, cause them problems here and there. It doesn't super fit into the build, but it is a small meal, so it benefits from any number of things. For example, if you got Skillet and Spicy Pepper early on, but you couldn't find Hot Potato for ages, you can slot the Slushy next to it, and that's perfectly fine, right? Because it's only 10 seconds, so it's a little bit longer, but it's still going to trigger Skillet. The same goes with Egg Timer. Egg Timer can go next to any of the damaging items in this build. So I really like this build for the fact that you can be super flexible with it. Like, that's really, really, really good for this build. Any one of these items can be picked up and put down, or replaced by other ones. If you get one to shiny, if you've got like a slimy, if you've got a slimy, which is a shiny Slushy, you could slot that in next to the Egg Timer if you wanted, to give it that extra boost. Or if you've got a shiny Hot Potato, maybe you put that where Slushy is, because the next item is Toaster. And I assume this is why it's called Double Trouble. This is one of my favourite items in the game. Every 7 seconds, Toaster applies 3 burn. It is a medium appliance and has the passive ability that adjacent small meal items have dual cast. This is one of, I think, the more balanced, or at least, probably the more balanced dual cast or tri-cast or whatever items, because you specifically need small meal items either side of it. That being said, we have a bunch of small meal items. We have Slushy next to it right now, but if we didn't, we could put Curry there, we could put Hot Potato there, and the last item we could put Skewer. So the only item we use that's not a meal, or the only items we use that aren't a meal, are Skillet, our other appliance that's also buffing stuff, or the one ingredient, which is Spicy Pepper. And there are a bunch of other meals that we can get as well. We can also guaranteed get a small meal every day from Jules' starting events, right? We can get that midday snack, which is a meal, and can trigger any of the things we need to trigger. So Toaster slots into this build really nicely, obviously also applying 3 burn every 7 seconds, Not huge, but on top of all the other burn we're doing, you know what? It helps. It helps us try to reach that sort of perma-burn state where curry is constantly charging faster and hopefully rack out some really, really high burn tick numbers. The one thing I have to mention on this, and honestly, I'm having second thoughts about it now, because Slushy applies so much joy. That's 20 joy, that's a lot. However, what I would like to see in this build is to shift the toaster to the left one more slot. That way, you are dual casting your item that is adjacent to Skillet, which will then effectively dual cast Skillet. You know, you could get this chain reaction going along. And even though 20 joy is a lot, 16 burn, well, actually, it wouldn't be 16 burn, would it? It would be... Or would it be 16 burn and then -2? I don't know how dual casting Hot Potato would work. But let's err on the side of caution and say that it did 15 burn, because it would do 8 and then become 7. 15 burn is more damage than 20 joy. It just takes a little bit longer to happen. But for this build, I think it's actually more impactful, especially seeing as you're triggering Skillet multiple times that way. So personally, I would move the toaster to the left one slot. That being said, no matter what you put between toaster and Skillet, so long as it is a small meal, you are off to the races, because you are dual casting that meal. It's going to activate Skillet twice, its own ability will activate twice, and it's going to be a considerable boost. So if you can get, I think toaster Skillet is a grand appliance combination. I feel like this is sort of the perfect setup. I'd just reorganize things a little bit. You just want these two appliances, Skillet and toaster, and a bunch of small meals, and you have one hell of a good burn build for Jules. Toaster, of course, is applying dual cast to 2 items, though. The item to the right of toaster, which is also being triggered by dual cast, is skewer. Every 7 seconds, this small meal weapon deals 9 damage and applies 2 joy for each meal or ingredient that you own. So we're bringing a weapon into this now, a stabby thing from Jules. At 8 gold, this is going to be coming into your build a little bit later. The same, by the way, applies to Toaster. Toaster's 10 gold. That's going to be found or at least picked up a little bit later. But this is the other thing we're dual casting. So it's going to deal 9 damage currently, and apply 2 joy for each meal or ingredient you own. It doesn't specify for each other meal or ingredient, so it includes itself. We love to see those items, because it means they can be used by themselves, just as a one-off. So, it's at least going to apply 11. We'll have a +2 for Slushy for 13, +2 for Hot Potato, 15, +2 for Spicy Pepper, 17, +2 for Curry, 19 damage. Effectively, right? It's 9 damage and 10 joy, so 19 points closer to winning. Obviously, joy slips through armor or shielding, so that's got that going for it. Dual casting that, so we're getting 18 damage and 20 joy. That's alright. You know what, I think I would actually just slip Toaster to the left one slot and have Hot Potato dual cast and Slushy dual cast, and then just have Skewer solo cast. Skewer is on a 7-second cooldown, so it does happen more regularly than a lot of things. If you wanted to get pure value out of Skillet, and this was, say you had like a shiny or a fancy Skillet, you would actually prioritize putting Skewer next to Skillet and toastering the Skewer, or potentially toastering the other side. But no, you toaster the Skewer, because that would trigger the most often, you know? This is a bizarre build out of context, so we have no shinies, we have no fancies, but we have options, right? And this is one thing I said earlier, I love about this build, is that it is so flexible. If we shiny and fancy Skillet, then we can just move our build around. We don't necessarily need to sell anything, we just prioritize things differently, and we get the perfect combination. If we got a shiny or fancy Toaster, then we probably just leave it where it is. We leave it either side of Slushy or Hot Potato, depending on what the fancy did. If we got, as I said, if we got the shiny or fancy Slushy, then you would definitely want to prioritize that. If our Curry somehow dropped in cooldowns from something, then we'd want to move that and swap it with maybe Spicy Pepper. Who knows? This has a lot of different options that it can do, and as I said before, there are other items out there, other small meals for Jules, that can slot into these places. Not a crazy number of them, and there are a lot more ingredients that you could also slot in, but it's a very safe build that you can get and sort of put together slowly throughout the course of a run and never be too put off by not finding the perfect item. If you don't find hot potato, it's fine, because you can technically put like ice cubes there or pancakes or something. Actually, toaster pancakes is a really nice combination. Pancakes, if you don't know, every 5 seconds applies 23 joy. But when you use it, you increase the cooldown by 2 seconds. So if you dual cast that, you're going to get the massive benefit of the what would then be 46 joy, and just burn through that cooldown. And effectively, you're not going to use it at any point thereafter. So yeah, really interesting combination. That was the Double Trouble build from Swampz using Skillet. I guess I have to give this a BBOOC rating. I thoroughly like, as I've mentioned many times now, how flexible this build is. And I can see the application for Toaster and where you've put it. Like I said, I would definitely move it 1 slot to the left. But I think I almost want to give this a 4.5 because I love the build. I think this build is exceptional because of, again, its flexibility. You can just do so many different things with this build, and anything that gets thrown at you throughout the bazaar, you can handle. But I can't get out of my head that Toaster's in the wrong slot. So I think I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5. However, if Toaster was 1 slot to the left, this is the first 5 that I give. This is brilliant. I love this build. I'm biased towards Jules, sure. Shoot me down in the comments. I don't care. I love Jules. I think this build is fantastic. It's 4 out of 5 for me. 5 out of 5 if Toaster's in the right place. If this has piqued your interest for Jules items, then you absolutely have to get on top of learning some of them, and we went through a whole bunch of the burn items, some of which you'll notice from the Skillet build, but maybe there are others in there that you would have picked in place of some of the items that Swampz picked for. So yeah, definitely worth checking out that, and it'll inform you a little bit more into how to run this particular Jules strategy.